If you're a guitar player who loves high gain tones, at some point on your tonal journey, you will probably have come across the Diezel VH4. Now you may not have tried one of these personally, but you've most certainly heard one. Everyone in the high gain world, from Metallica's James Hetfield to Tool's Adam Jones, has used the Diezel VH4 for their high gain sound. This amp has been around since the mid-90s, but it's always been slightly out of reach of most players because it's not a cheap amp. So you can sort of find them for around about the $2,500 mark from time to time, but they do tend to go for a little bit more because they are quite sought after pieces of gear. But in this video we're going to be looking at a way to get that classic Diezel VH4 sound on a bit more of a budget. Today we're going to be checking out the Diezel VH Micro. The VH Micro is a super small amp head, as you can see from the size on it, based on channel number 3 of the classic Diezel VH4. This has been sent to me on loan for a few days from my friends at Boutique Amps Distribution to check out, and I'm having a lot of fun with this thing. I'm not usually a high gain player, and I don't usually gravitate towards high gain amps, but the VH Micro is a lot of fun. There's a lot of really cool, inspiring tones in there. Diezel are usually seen as like a high gain amp company, but you can get some really cool sort of crunchy or moderately crunchy sounds from this thing, which is probably not the intended purpose of a Diezel amp, but it can do it. And obviously this thing being 30 watts and it's super lightweight, you could gig with this thing. You could take it in your gig bag to replace whatever head you want as a main head or as a backup head. It will do the job, because even though it is small, it does sound like a great amp. It's not a toy at all. It's a really robust, gig-ready piece of gear. So as I said, 30 watts, super lightweight, super compact, but a lot of fun. It's got one channel, which is obviously a drive channel. It's a Diezel amp. What more do you expect? You're not going to buy one of these for the clean tone. So there are two main influences for the tone of this little amp here today. The main one obviously is the channel 3 of the Diezel VH4. This is based on that drive tone, but there is a little bit of functionality in this from the Diezel VH4 Preamp Pedal as well. So it's like a combination of channel 3 of the amp and the VH4 Preamp Pedal, but all in all this is essentially a single channel variation on a VH4 style tone. So it's got all of those classic Diezel tones in there, but there's no tubes in sight, which is why it's so light. So you could literally, as I said, put this in a suitcase and take it anywhere in the world with you. That's how cool it is. very, very lightweight. You know, I'm literally waving it around on camera right now, and it's incredibly lightweight. I don't know how light, but I'd probably say somewhere around like the 1.5 kilo mark. You wouldn't really notice this thing in your gig bag for sure. So you can use this thing to power a cabinet. On the rear of the unit, we've got an 8 and 16 ohm output. And Diezel also very cleverly included an effects loop. Now, one thing a lot of small amp heads lack often is reverb or any other type of effect. The reason for this is obviously it's a cost-cutting exercise. You can't fill an amp this size in this price point with all these different effects. It doesn't make sense. But the addition of an effects loop is incredibly useful because you can play your high gain tones and you can still add your reverbs, delays, modulations, whatever you want after the preamp section. So that's very important. You can run an 8 or 16 ohm cab on this. Obviously the outputs, there's 2 of them, so you could in theory run 2 cabs of this thing, providing you're matching your ohms correctly. And yeah, you could literally take this on any stage and run this with 2 4x12s if you wanted to and have 30 watts of Diezel power. You can also use it straight from the effects loop send straight into your audio interface and add some IRs in post-production as well, or you can run it with something like a 2-notes Captor X, which is what I'm going to be doing in this video. So let's hear some tones from the Diezel VH Micro. The guitar I'm using for this video is my 1985 Kramer Striker. This is my favourite high gain guitar. It's very sort of hot 80s super strat sounding. This is plugged straight into the Diezel VH Micro, which is running into the Torpedo Captor X from 2-notes. This is running an IR of a Silver Jubilee style cab with greenback speakers located in a big hall, so all the reverb you're hearing is coming from the hall in the 2-notes Captor X. So before we hear what the VH Micro sounds like, let's take a look over at the front panel and see what everything does. So the first thing we've got there is the master volume. This controls the output volume of the amp. Now I'm running this at halfway. I'm going to move this just depending on what I'm setting the gain to because the 2 are linked there, but obviously if you were using this through a real cab, that would be your overall output volume. Because I'm going through the 2-notes Captor X, that is attenuating the signal, so it doesn't really matter too much for me where I set the master. Deep control is a really cool feature of this amp. It's an active bass control. This is slightly different to a typical bass control because it works around the 90 Hz region. So you can really push the sort of punch and tightness of the low end of the amp without the power amp sag. Like typically when you play with a tube amp, you crank the amp, you get a lot of bottom end, but it comes with that power amp sag. You don't get that with this deep control. Presence is up next. That's like an overall brightness control that works around the 3K region. Then you've got the bass, middle, and treble. These are passive EQs, so just like the original amp, obviously these allow you to fine tune the low, mid, and high frequencies. And then the gain is the magic one. That's the amount of gain you're hearing. So I'm going to start out with everything just around 12 o'clock. And I'm just going to play a little bit just so you can hear what it sounds like. So here is the VH Micro with everything at 12 o'clock. So even with the gain at halfway, there's plenty of punch there. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to go against the Diezel convention here, and I'm going to try and dial in a clean tone. So obviously this amp is designed as purely an overdrive amp. There's not really a clean channel on this thing, but I'm going to make one. So I'm going to set the gain pretty much just above the point where the amp would be off. Maybe even go a little bit lower. And then I'm just going to try and get a little bit of brightness out of this thing. Now obviously you wouldn't use the amp in this way, but I'm always curious how clean we can get something, because if you're someone like me that plays with typically low gain sounds, the Diezel VH Micro might even appeal to you in this setting. So this is sort of the Diezel VH Micro's pseudo clean sound. Now obviously that doesn't go super clean, because like I said, this amp really isn't designed for that. What this amp really excels at is, even with the gain just above 0 there, we get this nice fat crunch. That's really where the Diezel comes alive, when you start to dial in some of those slightly more biting gain tones. So the first thing we'll do, before we really start to dive into what this amp can do, is we'll just look at the range of the controls. So I'll just go back to Midnight Sec, and I'm just going to play a little bit and move through the EQ controls extreme settings. So start with the bass, middle and treble. I'll move them from all the way down, 12 o'clock, and all the way up. And I'll do the same with the deep and the presence controls, just so you can hear the range of the tone that you can shape with this thing. Just from that snippet there, you can really hear that there's a huge range of things you can do with each of the EQ bands. So the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm just going to play a little bit, and I'm going to tweak the EQs as we go. So I'm going to start with the gain pretty low. I'm going to keep it about here, maybe just above a quarter of the way up. And I'm going to play some sort of classic rock, 80s rock kind of stuff, and I'm just going to move the EQ around to suit whatever I feel like. So we can hear the sort of lower gain, so sort of heavy crunch kind of tones this amp can do. great range of crunchy tones available in this thing. I'm actually going to dial it up a little bit now. So we're going to dive into some slightly heavier tones. Now let's set the gain at just over halfway. Let's push this up a little bit. Now this is really cool because you can get quite modern with this thing on the gain on the higher settings. If we bring those mids down and we give the bass and the treble a little bit of a kick, as well as the deep control, we can kind of get into those pretty convincing sort of Metallica style tones. Obviously Hetfield was a big user of the Diezel VH4, so we can get some really sort of fat, saturated, scooped heavy tones. Obviously we can't take a look at a Diezel amp without doing this to the gain. So I'm going to reset the EQ now. I'm actually going to scoop those mids a little bit just to keep in the sort of Metallica kind of ballpark. I'm really enjoying actually some of the super heavy tones in this thing, which for me is quite interesting because, you know, as I've said a few times, I'm not really a high gain player. I don't usually play anything with tons of gain, but I'm really digging this amp. So yeah, let's see what this thing sounds like with the gain maxed. So there we go, there is the Diezel VH Micro. What a fun amp. 30 watts, super lightweight, and all of those classic Diezel tones. Now, considering the price point of this thing in the UK, it sits somewhere between £300 and £350, depending on where you get it from. It sounds like a real amp. There's no sort of practice amp or toy or gimmick factor to this thing at all. Even though it is super small, super compact, it sounds the part. It sounds huge. There's some real fat gain tones. And one day, I'm probably going to get to try one of these things to a 4x12 cab. Obviously today, for the purpose of noise and everything else, it's going through the 2 notes capped X, and it sounds fantastic through that. But I really get the feeling this thing probably has quite a bit of power behind it, so I think it could push a cab pretty well too. So yeah, if you've tried one of these out, I'd love to hear if you guys have tried one through a real cab and how that sounds, because the feel of this thing is great. It's got that real tight sort of tubey feel, I guess is a good way to describe it. It feels like I'm playing a real big amp, even though it's a 30 watt solid state amp. But yeah, a lot of fun there. So if you've checked one of these out, let me know down below in the comments. And if you've not checked one out, let me know down below what you think of this thing, because I think it sounds great. I'd love to hear what you guys think as well. Like I said, for someone who's not a high gain player, I'm kind of converted on the Diezel thing. I've never tried a real Diezel tube amp before, but this, you know, if this is anything to go by, I'm pretty sure the real deal is a lot of fun. So yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit the like and hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you for watching.